My name is Daniel Simon. My job here at WLT at World Literature Today is as editor-in-chief for the magazine, and I'm also really honored to help host the annual Neustadt Lit Fest. So welcome to our audience here in the room. Welcome to our audience around the world. We had about 20 different countries represented this morning on our Zoom conversation, and that was really incredible. So that's one of the great silver linings, I suppose, of this pandemic, is that this hybrid format allows us to go out to the world, to every corner of the earth, really, and also to connect to the teaching mission of the University of Oklahoma here with students and faculty, staff, and the general public in the room, which is, I think, really incredible. So we'll be joined here momentarily by Dr. Bojana Coulibaly and Boubacar Boris Diop, continuing day 2 of the Neustadt Lit Fest for 2022, and our focus on his work and his life and celebrating it for our annual, biennial prize winner for 2022, the 27th laureate of this prestigious prize, which has been around since 1970, thanks to the benefactors, the Neustadt family as the benefactors of that prize. So I will just briefly introduce our speakers. They're going to talk about writing Africa today as the subject of their conversation. Boubacar Boris Diop is the author of 17 books. He is a Senegalese author who's really renowned as a novelist, short story writer, essayist, journalist, editor, playwright, and publisher. He's just done so many amazing things. So we're really delighted to have him here today with us. And Dr. Bojana Coulibaly, who is the African Language Program Manager at Harvard University. She has taught African literary and cultural studies at several universities and was a Fulbright recipient in comparative literature at Gaston Berger University. She holds a PhD in African studies from the University of Tours in France. Her work focuses on publishing in African languages and the promotion of African languages in education and the African public space. Dr. Coulibaly is the managing editor of Ejo Editions, a publishing house specializing in literature written in Wolof and other African national languages, founded by Boubacar Boris Diop. So in their first public event here together during the 2022 Neustadt Lit Fest, please welcome our laureate of the year, Boubacar Boris Diop and Bojana Coulibaly.
Thank you. So first, let me allow to thank you, the team, Daniel, R.C., Davis, and of course the Neustadt family. We've been welcomed here very warmly, so I just wanted to mention that. And also the team, Kay and Terry, etc. So it's really a pleasure to share this panel with Boubacar Boris Diop that I've known for almost 20 years. And especially when it comes to discussing African literature and writing Africa Today, which has a long history of writing. And so in addition to discussing his work and how Boris Diop's work integrates writing Africa Today, which he will also talk a lot in his keynotes, I wanted to start maybe by asking you, given that Murambi, the Book of Bones, seems so contemporaneous today, although it was published 20 years ago, I wanted to ask you maybe to discuss how your work integrates writing Africa Today or African literature today as a whole, how you feel like if there has been any evolution, development since 2000 when Murambi was published, and how you feel that things are different or similar today in terms of writing literature for you in your experience.
Thank you, Bojana. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, especially to Kati. So happy you are here. I think I came 2 days ago But I find people very, very friendly. I'm happy to be here. Really, I feel comfortable to be in Oklahoma, in this university. Okay, I think, yesterday I said something about Jean-Paul Sartre's Qu'est-ce que la littérature? Okay, what is literature? But I think there is some specificity of African literature. And I think there is a book to be written, and its title could be What is African Literature? That's something very, very different from what many people think. You are an African from Cameroon, from Senegal, you write a book from Nigeria. It is published in London, in Paris. That's my case. And they say this is African literature. But it is much more complex than that. First of all, young writers, what they say African literature doesn't exist. Okay, you have books, you have writers, but African literature doesn't exist. The same with Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he say, books written in Portuguese, in French, in English. That's not African literature. He calls it Afro-European literature. And we are on a continent where people, they write books in English, in French or in Portuguese, for population who can't read that. If I take my case, in Senegal, between 5 and 10% of the population can read French. And yet I publish my books in French. So we have all these interrogations, and you have so many differences between what we call Anglophone and Francophone writers. So many people, they say, he's from Nigeria, he's from Gambia, he's from Mozambique, he's from Senegal. That's African literature. But in fact, the colonial legacy, I think, is very, very important. I was for 4 years in Nigeria, and I understood many things I didn't suspect before I went there. I was teaching creative writing, and I was teaching Francophone writers in translation. Bernard Dadje, Amadou Kourouma, Ousmane Sembène Mongobeti, and a student asked me one day, "Sir, why are we reading these books? Aren't we in an African literature class?" And in fact, it means that for the young generation, the gap between Francophone and Anglophone, is huge. They just don't think that if you write in French, you are an African writer. Now, what happened with Rwanda, Murambi? We went there, it was in 1998, and what we did, I think it was exceptional. It seems to me that in the history of literature, nobody did this before us. No, I'm not boasting, but that's just the truth. We decided to go to Rwanda as a group of writers. We were 10 writers from different African countries. 2 from Rwanda. We found them in Rwanda, from Senegal, myself, from Chad, from Ivory Coast, from Burkina Faso, etc., etc. And we said, okay, we go there, we are going to know more. We'll try to know more about the Tutsi genocide. And if we feel like, we are going to write books about this tragedy. So we did it. And what matters here is that before we went to Rwanda, none of us had written a single line about the genocide. It took us to go to Rwanda to understand what happened there 4 years before. Because we went in 1998 and the genocide took place in 1994. So, why did we go there? What was the initial push? We were in a festival in Lille. Lille, it's a town near Paris in the north of France. And this festival was called Fest Africa. It was about cinema and literature. And while we were there, I think it was in 96, September 96, we heard that in Nigeria, the dictator Sani Abacha had killed one of us, a Nigerian writer, Kensaru Viva, who was a peaceful militant, kind of
environmentalist.
Yeah, ecologist, environmentalist. He was hung in the prison of Port Harcourt with 8 other militants, Ogoni militants. Right. So we ask ourselves questions. Okay, we are writers. We say we are committed writers. We are trying to liberate Africa. And yet, okay, in Africa and in the country of the Nobel laureate, Soyinka, a dictator is just killing a writer. Why are we writing? What are we writing for? Does it make sense to write books in such circumstances? And some Rwandan friends were in Lille at that time with us. And they told us, we are in 96, and 2 years ago, in an African country, you talk about Kensaru Viva, but 2 years ago, over 1 million people were killed in Rwanda. So we started thinking about all this, and from there we decided to go to Rwanda. And the Ghanaian writer William Sassin said once, it's more interesting in French than in English, because he was playing on the words. He said, être écrivain en Afrique, c'est écrire en vain. Being a writer in Africa, it's writing in vain. roughly translated. So, so we went there, and I think Rwanda has been a turning point for all of us, because after we went to Rwanda, when we came back, many books were published by other writers about Rwanda. And I think that the fact we wrote about Rwanda, was something that led Rwandans themselves to write books. And today, most of the books about the genocide, that's not Murambi, that's not Tierno Morenebo's book. These books, they are written by Rwanda, and we work with them, in great complicity.
Thank you. Yes, a lot of material here. I know that a lot of it is going to be covered also in the keynote address. So in terms of your audience, you mentioned that for a long time, because African literature was using English and French and Portuguese, I remember the famous essay by Chinua Achebe, who speaks about an English that is adapted to the Nigerian environment or the African environment. And my question would be, how did you, in your own experience, tackle that issue? So in terms of audience, again, Katsi, who says that we're writing for Europeans or Westerners to explain Africa to them. How did you tackle that challenge in terms of moving away from discussing Africa to others to actually writing to the people that you feel close to?
In fact, that's what I used to call the original sin of African literature. Le péché originel. Let's go back to the colonial times. I mean in Francophone Africa. And you had people who went to school, French school. They became school teachers, they read French literature, and they started writing. And this was encouraged by colonial administration. Because, the British Empire, France, they say, we colonized Africa because we wanted to bring them education, good health, and things like that, modernity. So it was good for the French administration to have African intellectuals writing in French. And they did that, but very soon, these writers, they started denouncing colonization. So I think it was admirable. It was something very, very cool. But they did it in French. They did it in French, and they were talking for
a French audience.
No, in fact, they were fighting. They were trying to become the voices of their people, of African people. Except that these people couldn't read their book. So they were kind of intermediary. I'm going to write a book against colonization. I want to liberate my people. I will talk for my people. But when you do that, you are asking your people to just keep quiet. So it was a discussion between the African elite and the colonizer. So they started writing in French because they wanted to be understood by the colonizer.
Right.
They wanted the colonizer to feel ashamed
Right. Right.
and liberate their country. But after independence, we kept writing in French. And what we see now, in fact, we talk about literature Negro-African, about Negro-African literature. You know, I always ask myself, who will dare one day talk about Blanco African literature or white African literature, something like that? Yeah, it would be completely ridiculous.
Right. It's related to negritude, maybe.
Yeah. And now I talk about Negro Parisian literature. Yeah. The most important writer, the best, it's clear. They don't live in Africa.
Right.
They live in Europe. They live in France, in Paris, in Toulouse, in Bordeaux. They write in French. And they are more and more part of the French literary institution. In Africa, we don't know them. We see them on TV. We hear them on TV5, RFI Radio, or stuff like that.
Collège de France.
Yeah, they go to Collège de France, etc. Their work is validated, not in their country, but in Europe, but in France. I think it's a big problem. As a writer, I know what I'm talking about because for a long time I have been through this. Oh yes, I have been through this. I was in this system, so I know perfectly how it works. Yeah, it took to me, I will talk about this later, to go to Rwanda to understand, what I was involved in and to liberate myself from it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And the best way to do it is to write in your mother tongue.
Exactly.
It's very complicated. It's very, very difficult. I think someone said, I like this idea. That's not the problem which is difficult, but rather the difficulty, must be the problem. You have to,
Right.
It's difficult, but you have to try. It will take time.
Yes.
It will take 1 century, 2 centuries, but we have to start now. So when we talk about African language, people, they say, we're going to read it. The market, etc. No. Literature is not about that.
Right.
It has never been about that. There's a word in French, postérité. It's about posterity.
Absolutely.
You have to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So what you're referring to is also what Cheikh Diop used to call the literature of transition. Given that all this literature that was written in European languages emerged from the elite that was assimilated into those languages. I mean, even the Anglophone side, which was a little bit different in terms of colonialism. Ngugi talks about this in Decolonizing the Mind. and the literature of African, so the language of African literature, where he explains that this process of colonial or of mental colonialism was so ingrained, so strong, that it will take time until we fully decolonize the mind of African writers. And so it's interesting to see now how we are transitioning with you, for example, here as an example, into maybe a different kind of literature. So I find it interesting, and I wanted to ask you, how do you think translation comes into play? What is the role of translation? Because you are also a translator. You translated your work. You've translated Aimé Césaire's Une saison au Congo to Wolof, which is also a very important choice, to translate to Wolof rather than translate another work to French. You translated your work from Wolof to French. So this conversation that is embedded within translation, and we are here in the Neustadt Prize, which is also based on the idea that we can reach literature anywhere in the world, and translation is that medium or that instrument. So I just wanted to get your perspective on that. How does translation help with the challenges that African literature has faced in terms of this question of language that forces African writers to write for a foreign audience with that filter, the language filter? So how is translation helping that? And also, how is publishing helping this, I would say, writing of African literature, since you also publish books?
Okay. Some years ago, I have a publisher in Paris who, she's a friend too, Laure Leroy, who publish Murambi. Zulma, it's a very good publishing house. And one day, one Saturday afternoon, we were at a meeting organized by Présence Africaine about African language. And I was there. Wole Soyinka was there, on the panel I mean. The Senegalese philosopher Suleiman Bachir Diagne was there, and Pape Samba Diop too, Professor Pape Samba Diop. We had this conversation about, and I talked about Wolof, and Laure was in the audience. And after that, we had a coffee. Yeah, I remind, she's a great publisher. And she said, why shouldn't we, do something? You in Dakar and me in Paris. And we created a label of translation, and we called it Ceytu. Ceytu, is the birthplace of Cheikh Anta Diop. We did a great job about a great African thinker, in fact, the most influential currently. And we decided to translate in Wolof all great books of world literature. And the first book we published, there was Maria Mabad, So Long a Letter, L'Africain de Jean-Marie Leclésio, Nobel Prize. Jean-Marie Leclésio, and Aimé Césaire's A Season in the Congo. And I was the one who translated. And we published it. And it's now the label Ceytu is integrated in our publishing house, Ceytu. But that's how we start. So it means that we always knew that, that's very, very important. Because human language, they keep talking to each other. Human beings, they don't. But human language, they keep talking to each other. You can't translate everything from Swahili to English, from English to Ekegusi to Kikuyu, etc. And the one who was the first to tell us this, it was Cheikh Anta Diop. in 1954 in his book Nation Agriculture, Negro Nations and Culture, and in this book, to show how it is important to translate, he translated a chapter of Einstein. Because people, they used to say, African language, that they can translate some abstract concept. When it's too abstract, it's not for African language. So he did it. In the same book, he translated La Marseillaise, the French national team. He translated Greek writers, I forget. Yeah, many important authors. And he said, this is the proof that it was done in Wolof. So he was the first to do that. That's why we call this label, this collection, Cheitu. So there's nothing more important than translation. And Domigolo, I wrote it originally in Wolof, but there's a Wolof translation. It's a French translation, Spanish, English, Italian translation on the way. So that's not really a problem. So I did it myself. That's the tricky part of it, because it's like, if you write a book in Wolof, it was the case at the beginning with Mugiwa Chongo. You are the only one to be able to translate it. I don't agree with that. Now, my third novel in Wolof, Malanum Lundum, we are discussing with Yale University. They want to
Publish it.
the rights to publish it, to translate it into English, and they will find their translator. And there is a French translation by a specialist of Wolof, Alice Chaudemanche, in Paris. She's translated it in French, with Senegalese living in Paris. And Alice is one of the greatest, I think, even very young, but the greatest specialist of Wolof in France. So translation, I think there's nothing more important.
Right. It's also a quite normal thing when we think about European countries. We commonly translate things, and you talk about reading all these great authors in French, world authors in French, in your father's library. So it's quite a normal, I would say, thing when it comes to discussing European countries, but we tend to constantly ask if Africans ask themselves, why should we translate? Because no one will be able to do it or will be reading those things. I remember that when you started writing, when you wrote Domigolo the first time, people were telling you, who are you writing for? I mean, no one will buy your books. And then when you translated it to French, they were saying, you see, you have to translate it for people to read it. But when we go fast forward today, with the creation of Ejo in 2017 and the publishing of Bameluka Chibarma and Malanum Lundem, we realize, in fact, that it has incredibly increased the readership in Senegal. There's more people reading today than there used to be back then when people were writing in French. As you said, the books that Senegalese writers wrote, Ivorian writers wrote, Cameroonian writers wrote, were read in Paris, were read, maybe sometimes translated from French to English then. But now that you started writing and publishing in Wolof, we realize how much the everyday people, those people who maybe did not necessarily attend French school, are starting to read your work, which is, I would say, an incredible development in such a short time, in your lifetime. And again, it traces back to Murambi. I find it interesting as an anecdote that Jennifer Croft, who originally didn't read Murambi, she read Domigolo translated to English, and how it is that translation to English that pushed her to contact the translator, and the translator told her, "Oh, you should read Murambi," and that's where we are. That's how we are today. So it just shows us this conversation between languages that is really important. Again, Pascal Casanova in The World Republic of Letters explains that translation is also this dynamic between dominant and dominated languages, and I think it is high time that we stop considering African languages as dialects and as languages that cannot translate into math and science when it has been proven over and over again that it is possible. So again, you talked about writing for posterity. It is true that nowadays writers, especially young writers, tend to imagine themselves as writers, which you did when you were 15, 16, you wrote your first novel. My question would be, maybe as a final question, what is the advice you would give to writers today? Those young writers that you see maybe in Senegal, in Rwanda, and even here in the United States. What is the one advice you would give them when they start thinking about what am I going to write about? What type of style should I adopt? What is the narrative voice I want to choose? And themes and topics. Is there anything that you would give them as advice?
I think I remember that Maxime Gorky said once to young writers, listen to what your elders say about literature, but never do that. Yeah. Never do that. Yeah. No, it's very, very difficult. When you are a writer, you just at the beginning of your literary career, you just decide to share some stories. You think they are very interesting, and so you write. And generally, really, I just said it yesterday, the book, it comes from behind. Yeah. When I listen to people talking about my books, I'm very impressed. It was a case here with Fatoumata and Madame Balla. Yeah. And I think, yeah, they know my work better than me. So, yes, it's true. It's true, and it's very, 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 very interesting because many writers, that's my case. When you are done writing a book, that's finished. You don't reread it. And sometimes people, they ask me about Le Temps de Tamango was published 40 years ago, and maybe they just read it a week before, and they're talking to me about François Navarro, about the characters who are inside. But anyway, I can say that's the only thing, the only advice. If you want to become a great writer, you just have to read great literature. And there is something more important than reading great literature, is that if you like a book, don't hesitate to read it 20, 30. I used to tell to my students 43 times. And they asked me, why 43? I said, no, it could have been 42 or 44. It means just keep reading and rereading. But if you don't like a book, even if the whole world says that it is the best book in the world, if you don't like it, just throw it and forget about it. That's it. I think you need to have a strong character.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you don't know what you like and what you dislike in literature, maybe you can't become a good writer.
Right, right. So I was just wondering, we're not doing any Q&A, we're just continuing?
Yeah, you want
Yeah. Okay. So you started by saying that some writers say African literature doesn't exist. Does it mean that we should be saying Senegalese literature, Rwandan literature? What do we do about this notion of defining ourselves when we are writers? Because I know that a lot of writers have said, well, I'm not an African writer, I'm just a writer. So how do you consider yourself?
You know, that's the African paradox. People, there is a website called Africa is not a country. Okay, you know, we used to see Africa, yeah, as a unique place. And yet we know that what we can say about Mozambique, it can't be true about Mali. What we can say about Botswana has nothing to do with Mauritania. You have these differences. But because of our history, because of the colonial occupation, because of the slave trade, because of our history,
Common experience.
we feel that we must stick together. So this is the paradox.
Right.
We know that we are very, very different, but we feel that we must stick together. And that's why it's so difficult to talk about Africa. For example, when it comes to issue of language, the situation is very different from a francophone country to an anglophone country.
Right.
Ngugi, he says in his memoir, Dreams in Time of War, he says that the first time he was praised for something he had written. So it was, he was 10 years old and he had written something in Kikuyu.
Right.
It means that in British colony, kids, the schoolboys, they had to learn their mother tongue. In Senegal, never the case.
Yeah.
Never the case. It was forbidden to. And so when you become a writer, like Ngugi or Soyinka, Soyinka, he translated Fagunwa into English.
Right.
Daniel Fagunwa. Soyinka was the one. Exactly. Right. So you know your mother tongue. Right. You know how to write it. Yeah. That's not the case in a francophone Africa.
Yes.
That's very, 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 very different. Right. And the Portuguese speaking world, that's another story. That's the Lusophone, right. Like we say, they say in French. Yeah.
Right. Yes, I know the challenge because I've taught several times or have been asked to teach African literature. And as you can imagine, 54 countries, choosing 5 novels has been really challenging for my syllabus. So I remember at Harvard when I taught the first time, I decided to actually choose a text from ancient Egypt. And we studied, you mentioned several times, Aikwe Arma's publishing house, Per Ankh, they translated some of those ancient Egyptian texts. And it's interesting because I found this connection that you talk about in Sanhat, which is a text from 4,000 years ago. I find references to cities, towns and cities we find in Mali. And that was interesting to me because, but the literature that we consider as being the literature of Timbuktu comes much later, several thousand years later. So this connection is there, and it kind of shows that African literature also has this Pan-African dimension to it, and that the African Renaissance is also engaging in this conversation between different countries. We talked about, can a Senegalese writer talk about what happens in Rwanda? And I think it's this conversation for us to be able to be in solidarity, to talk about issues that we face everywhere in the world is very important. What is happening in Rwanda could happen somewhere else, and we've seen it happening everywhere else. So I think it's important that we have literature to be able to put things, together and in context. So I'll let him let us know about the time. But I think we have 4 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
So,
Just to go back to
yes.
Africa is not a country. Some years ago, I don't remember, maybe it was in 2010, in New York, there was a big PEN International Conference.
Right. I remember that.
Yeah. Africa was
The awardee.
was invited.
Yeah.
Was invited. Okay. I think Ngugi was there, Chimamanda, so many people. I mean, Ataforna from everywhere.
Right.
That's no problem. It was very interesting. And I asked, who will be the next guest country? Yeah, the following year.
Right.
Oh, and I was thought it would be Mexico. So, yeah, in fact, Mexico was invited, and then it was Turkey, France, important countries. There's no problem with that. But when it comes to Africa, they will never say you are going to invite, this year it will be Senegal, or this year it will be Nigeria. Maybe Senegal is a small country.
Right.
But I think a country like Nigeria, a country like South Africa,
Right. Kenya.
Kenya, they deserve
Yeah.
to be invited, just as such. But when it comes to Africa, it's a continent. It's the same thing everywhere. That's not fair.
Right.
And something I would like to add, it's about the language. I told you about this student telling me, why are we reading Bernard Dagier, Mongo Betty, and Ousmane Sembe? Aren't we in an African literature class? What happened? We read these books, and they were fascinated.
Right.
They saw that there's no difference clearly between Ngugi wa Thiong'o writing in English and Ousmane Sembe writing in French.
Right.
On the contrary, myself, I write in French, and my literary, how to say it, the atmosphere of my books, their content, their spirit, that has just nothing to do with my colleagues. Writing in French, like me, in France, in Belgium, in Quebec, in Switzerland. We all write in French, but I have more similarities, much more similarity with Biakuto, Neustadt winner, by the way, Noureddin Farah, they in Portuguese, in English, and I write in French. It's the same thing. We have our personalities, but I think it can be said that, European languages, in fact, they divide us more than they unite us. Or in a way, they unite us. If I meet Miyakuto, if I meet Noureddin Farah, I met him, I think, many times, by the way. We talk in English. And so because of a European language, there is a possibility of communication. But when we talk about literature, which is a very different thing, because it's about the soul, about the spirit, so we just can't interact. And that's what Ngugi says. I think for me, that's one of the most important things he says in Decolonizing the Mind. Yeah, he says that language, any language, has a dual function. The practical one, just to communicate in daily life. It doesn't matter if you speak English or French or Wolof, you have daily life. And he says the other function, and that's the most important, it's the spiritual function, cultural function. Yeah, language reflects the soul of a nation, of a culture. And that's what we miss when we write in European language.
Absolutely. And when it comes to also education, it's very important that we have available material for these students that will be learning in Wolof to be able to read great literature. And it will become the language of Boris Diop or Shekalyundao. So, yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think is it time? Okay.